The primitive forms of artificial intelligence we already have proved very useful.
AI is a golden opportunity.
How do we ensure that this technology is regulated?
The long arc of technological history is now in an extraordinary new phase.
The AI 6 Podcast with Joanne Sweeney.
Well, Jim Mulhall, thank you so much for joining me once again on the AI 6 Podcast. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be back. I have to say, after our previous discussion in Dublin, I got a lot of really nice comments. So I look forward to these conversations.
Well, you know, it's almost a year since we first met at Harvard Kennedy School, taking the executive program in AI in public policy. But so much has changed since then, hasn't it?
It really has. It really has. You know, and a couple things about when we took that class. Which, by the way, for everyone listening, it's a great class to take. I highly recommend it. I got a lot out of that class, and I had kind of decided to take that class because there was this brewing tsunami of AI, everything AI coming at us, and I kind of said to myself, everyone's talking about this thing. There's a lot of doom and gloom, and I'm kind of tired of sitting around waiting for this tsunami to swallow up my village. I'm going to learn how to build a boat. So that's why I decided to take that class. And it was a great class, but I walked away from it feeling I had learned a lot, done a lot, but also knowing that this only puts me weeks to months ahead. Not much more than that. And what was also really interesting is that some friends I had talked to before I took the class were saying to me they really just didn't know anything about AI, you know, really. And by the end of that summer, after I had come back from it, they were all talking about how everybody's talking about it. And just in that short period of time, that's how much it changed and it got adopted. Well, particularly it got adopted. That's how fast it was coming at us. So my prediction that it puts me weeks to months ahead, I think was very true. And then that accelerated even more. And so, so what I've been doing since that time, though, is I walked away from that class. So just for listeners, I have a background in crisis management and banking. And my project for the class was to build a ChatGPT that a crisis manager could use to better manage crises. So that's what I set out to work on after the class, because the prototype we had built in class worked very well. And I had two goals. I wanted to write a book about the concept of using AI for crisis, which has enormous potential. I mean, really saving lives kind of stuff. And at the same time, create a tool that crisis managers would use. And so I got to work, and as I started to work on this, and as I was trying to keep up with everything that was going on, I ran into two very big problems. And the problem number one was I was realizing that by the time I get these things finished, they're going to be close to obsolete because things are changing so fast. And boy, did that turn out to be true. Because if you look at what's happening to the SaaS companies, how their stock prices are getting crushed, the concept of, you know, selling a software product wasn't a dead concept yet. I think it might be close to dead now. So that changed dramatically during that time frame. And then the other piece was that all of my expertise that I'm putting into this content, well, doesn't that become part of the training data? And then doesn't that then sort of hand over a lot of my IP and a lot of my essence of what I'm contributing to AI itself? So how do you kind of maintain, you know, your own value without sort of just making it out there in this sophisticated rebundled form that AI will repackage it as? We've all done it. Say, you know, hey, give me investment tips as if you were Warren Buffett, you know, or help me write a song like Taylor Swift. So, I mean, that's really true for everybody. So these kind of became two big roadblocks for me that I started to struggle with. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, because I'm kind of changing some of my approach on this.
Yeah, I can definitely concur with that. I mean, if we were to take the class now back in Harvard, I think it would be a completely different class. We did
Probably
study
true.
agentic AI, but I did not predict that agentic AI would be ubiquitous and mainstream, and that all the models would be offering it to us just like they offered the chat bot. The second piece about building with AI and then it becoming obsolete for a large market and selling a subscription. I'm also building and expanded my idea that we tested at Harvard. That was PaulBot, the political communications assistant. Now it's evolved into govcoms.ai, where I provide a European solution and a European domain expert model to my market over this side of the world. But at the same time, as I'm currently building with my tech team, I also am very nervous about how fit for purpose it will be by the time I get it into the hands of those that are going to beta trial it, but also buy it. And I think for me, I could stop or I can keep building and go, just make the promise to myself and potentially to my customers, as the technology moves, I will move too. But there's another concern that I'd like to add to that, and it only happened in the last week or 10 days. Actually, by the time you're listening to this, it'll nearly be 3 weeks. And this is where the US government intervened and mandated Anthropic to remove Fable 5 and Mythos 5 from their platform. And many of us are building with the underbelly of Claude because we love it and we know how good it is into our own products. And so now we're going, well, if we're relying on these frontier models and then they're taken away from us, what are we left with? And so that for me is my current dilemma. And I don't know if you've got any views on it.
Well, I don't have any news more than what you've been reading as well. But I have to say, just thinking about the idea, it's a concern for me too. One of the things I want to talk about today is that we live in this time of extraordinary contradiction. That's where we really live. Everything from AI is taking over everything to you hearing about something only like 30% of the United States apparently has used AI, and even smaller percentage worldwide. So I can go on with a list of contradictions about how we're perceiving what's happening and what seems to actually be happening. In consistent with those contradictions is that the AI companies are basically saying they're begging government to regulate them, which is not something you usually hear, right, from powerful companies and powerful companies in startup phases. But they've been saying this for a long time. And there's a contradiction there in what they're doing. On one hand, they're saying this thing is so dangerous, we need you to regulate us. And part of that may be sales bluster in leading up to an IPO to make them seem very important. But certainly a lot of it's true too. And then at the same time, they're saying, so we need regulation. And this is the part that's really weird. They're coming out and saying that they need regulation, which is unheard of. But the contradiction there is that they're saying this thing is so powerful and so dangerous, we need regulation. But at the same time, we are speeding forward as fast as possible, despite the fact that we know we need to be stopped, as if they can't do it themselves. There's a contradiction that's kind of not making any sense. Now throw in this recent piece with Claude, and I promise I'm not going to get political here, but this is not the most transparent age of government in America. And why they make certain decisions about what they do, I think a lot of people can very fairly question, no matter where you are politically, what are these decisions based on? And they may not always be based in best policy. They might be based in a whole bunch of other things that maybe shouldn't be influencing these decisions. So it could be that Fable came out, government looked at it and said, you know what, this thing is dangerous, and it is time we put some regulation. But Claude's had some run-ins with the current government. And so you can't help but wonder if that's at play as well. Of course, we don't know, right? So it's not a good development. I wish we were in a place where we could say a sober government has decided that we need to slow this down, and private enterprise is firmly behind that decision, and so on. but I don't think we can say that at the moment. So it's not a good development. I tend to be against the idea of government stifling innovation, but there is something needed here, and I hope this is being done for the right reasons. I guess time will tell us.
And we had this conversation also last summer at Harvard, and I was making the observation that as being only one of 3 or 4 people from Europe in the room, I was raising the question consistently about what is the innovation and the regulation divide, what's going to be the impact of that, because in Europe, we are going straight in with regulation, and in China and in the US, they have an opposing and a different approach. Although in saying that, just in the last 10 days in the EU, they have agreed to pause some of the stricter regulations because we are also aware that we are stifling innovation and we need to test the capability of this technology. And the only people that test and innovate are business people, right? Not regulators. So I think your argument when we started that we are living in contradictory times actually sums up it perfectly. And also on your point around, the major AI models in the US asking for regulation. Dario Armodi actually a couple of weeks ago asked for everyone to pause and to slow down AI, but they're not going to slow it down if OpenAI and Gemini are going to race ahead. So it seems that there's this race by nations and race by the top 5, 6 companies to be the first and to be the biggest, while the rest of us are watching on the sidelines.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And another piece of this, when you look at it from the global scale, as you were just talking about, and by the way, this is not an original thought, this is what I've been seeing other people saying, is the but China argument. Well, we would slow down, but China won't. Well, we would put in regulations, but China won't. Well, we won't use it for military purposes, but China won't. So the but China is doing a lot of work, and that's a phrase I actually copied from AI because it uses that phrase all the time. It's doing a lot of work. The but China excuse is becoming a very convenient remark to kind of stepping away from taking responsibility. And the other thing I've been hearing in my research and seeing in my research is that, China, we may not agree with how they govern their country and some of their values and so on, but they don't want to live in an unsafe world either. And from what I've been hearing is that they're probably not going to be in the best place to take a leadership role in this, right? They are a half a step behind, maybe only half a step, but they are a half a step behind. And I don't know that China's policy is going to be the one that the rest of the world can turn to and say it's right for us. So there is this thought that China is really hoping that the US will kind of be the adult in the room and say, here's what good regulation should look like, so that they can also step off of this arms race that scares them just as much as it scares people here, right? So somebody has to be the adult in the room and say, we can't let this get out of control, and we do need some proper regulation. And who's going to be that person who leads that? I would like to see the US be that leader. And I think what we would find is that China would probably follow suit. So the but China excuse is kind of running thin, I think, at this point.
Do you think, and David Keane from the class of 2025 at Harvard, who's built Magpie, Australia's first sovereign AI frontier model, do you think sovereign models is a legitimate, a practical, and affordable solution for other nation states?
Well, I have to say it's not something I know enough about to talk in too much depth about, and I would really, he's been on my list to kind of get a little closer to what he's doing because it is so interesting. But I think that the problem with the idea of countries building their own is that, well, there's a couple problems there. One is it defines AI along geographic lines, which it has a place. It's not irrelevant. But it's kind of by its nature not a geographic entity, AI. And then the second part is it takes an enormous amount of capital to create these things, like huge amounts of capital. And there are a few countries of the world or a few places in the world that can do that. So I don't know if this is really a viable option for smaller countries. And one thing, in one of the articles I considered writing and didn't because I try so hard not to get into political debates, was nationalization of all this. I think that is going to be part of our future. And now we're hearing it talked about very explicitly, like here even in the US, the idea that some politicians are proposing like 50% gets owned by government. We're seeing the government actually owning a stake in NVIDIA. But you also have to wonder if AI becomes as powerful as it's promised to be, and if it can have the potential danger that it would show to societies and the governments. Some of the weakest governments of the world, some of the more paranoid, anxious ones, are very likely to say, we're shutting this thing down in our country, or we're taking control of it, one or the other. So if you were to look at certain, and I won't name certain countries, but you can just imagine certain countries in certain regions where they're not very stable places in to begin with. The idea of AI coming in, disseminating information they don't like, putting out messages that they don't want, even if they're accurate, right? Never mind if there's some sort of interference from an opposing political party or an outside country or something like that. Just as they would nationalize an oil company that becomes too powerful to be on its own, I don't see how that some version of that won't become true in the AI space. Google was famously kind of shut out of China at one point a number of years ago, and I think this is coming as well.
So I always say the more I learn about AI, the more fearful I get, because I always say the companies who are in the driving seat of building these models, they know way more than they tell the rest of us. And
Right.
What we've already seen with Mythos and its capability of finding glitches on the internet that nobody ever had found, and Anthropic handing it over to governments and to financial institutions saying, we don't want to have this in our responsibility. I just don't know where it's going to go. And I think if we were to come back in another year's time and say, hey, what's happening now? Where do you think we're going? Like, where are we going to be even in 12 months? I think to the end of the decade is even too far to predict.
It is. And I heard the author from Sapiens talk about for the first time in probably the history of humanity, we really have no clue what 3 years from now looks like. There's always been change, he went on to say. There's always been lots of change. Yes, you're a farmer and the Vikings might invade or something like that. Nothing against our Scandinavian friends. but these kinds of things can always happen, right? So there's always been political change. However, being a farmer was probably going to be a good idea next year and in 5 years, and teaching my kids how to farm and my grandkids how to farm is probably not going to be wasted time, even as much as the Industrial Revolution kind of changed things and so on. We knew that, but we have no idea what 3 to 5 years looks like from now. And the rate of change itself, and this was actually for the Harvard class, one of my essays was about, it's the rate of change itself that is such a threat, because it kind of becomes almost impossible to keep up with it. And when you have a rate of change that's so fast that you can't keep up with, you can't plan. And when you can't plan, you introduce chaos. This is basic to crisis management, by the way. So I think we're in that place. I do think in the end, I don't want to be so gloomy, but I think in the end, this is all going to be very positive. I do think that we're going to get a lot out of all of this. However, having said that, it's probably going to be a difficult transition period. It may be long and hard, and I don't know exactly what that looks like at the moment. And anybody who tells you they do is just not telling you the truth.
Very true. And like, you're a banker by trade. What about the money that we invest and make off the back of AI for people who are building with AI that have their own ideas? Should they proceed? Should they try and collaborate? Should they try and get bought up by bigger companies who are trying to survive and lead?
Well, okay, so I kind of stepped away from my Substack for a while as I was struggling with these problems of how to differentiate and how not to get consumed by the training data and so on. But I'm going to get back to it, and I kind of wanted to use this podcast as kickoff for that. But my next article is going to be called "Don't Call Me an AI Expert," and the reason being that I think what we're going to find very soon is that being an AI expert is kind of like being a licensed driver in 1940. When cars first started coming off this new technology called the assembly line, they were fantastic multipliers. I mean, just what you could do. I mean, it could, it was a horse that never needed to be fed or got sick, or it was just, it was just this great thing. So being licensed drivers was a really, really valuable commodity for a short period of time. And I think being an AI expert is pretty soon going to be kind of like walking into a job interview and saying, I know how to use a mouse. It was new at one point, but that's not going to last. So while we hear people talk about how AI is accelerating, how powerful it's becoming, and how much it can do, all of which is true, one thing we don't hear a lot about is how easy it's going to be to use it. Right. So it's already quite easy to use. And this is one of the things I was discovering as I was trying to build my own stuff is like, you don't need a whole lot of Jim in order to build this on your own. Now, there are some contradictions there, too, because everyone's talking about everyone will just vibe code everything. And I would push back on that. But getting back to the first point about, don't call me an AI expert, is that you're going to need to have an expertise in something else where you're just using AI as a tool. That is, from where we sit now, that looks to me like a much more durable route than the idea of calling yourself an AI expert. So I'm looking to pivot towards, kind of the effect of crisis and the management of crisis on human beings, how human beings handle it, how they make decisions, how they cope with it, what they're likely to do. And because at the end of the day, crisis, that is the ultimate impact. It's on humans, down to the individual who's, in a certain situation, to the organizations that are impacted and so on. So I'm looking to kind of pivot back to the human element. Whereas before I was saying, I want to create content about how AI will be used in crisis. Now I'm thinking it's going to be more about how humans deal with crisis. AI is just one piece in that background of how all that applies, which is really a complete about face, but I think it's warranted.
Well, I tell you what, it's not. It's actually going back to something that Hans Peter said to us the day that the lights went out at Harvard and we had to go to the hotel.
Yeah.
That crisis brilliantly. And he said that those that will succeed in this era are domain experts who leverage the technology and to just accelerate what you have. And I think the reframing of that is just brilliant. So again, if I'm creating a tool that can help my government communications clients do better work, what I'm also doing is teaching them and showing them how to show up as humans and make what their citizens are receiving much more transparent and fluid. So I think we've kind of come full circle in that 12 months. That's interesting. And another point is that content as a commodity to continue to train and to feed these models, where is it going to come from if they're sucking up all the information daily? And that's going to come from humans, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. The human piece, I think, is so important too, because one of my series of articles was about what AI can't do. And it's specifically the things, there's a few things, but it's specifically the things where the reason people want it is because a human has done it. Okay. So a really interesting story, just as we always know that factual stories, nonfiction, is always much more interesting and much more outlandish than fictional stories. And that's because they actually happen to a person. And I'll take this a step further. I don't know if you heard about this in Ireland, but the Knicks, which is New York City's basketball team, won the championship recently. It was a huge deal here in New York. And there's a lot of reasons why it was such a big deal. They haven't won in over 50 years. And New York is really a basketball town that struggles to produce a good team. But so there's a lot of reason why there was so much excitement. But I would argue one other thing. It was a human accomplishment, right? So there outside of Wall Street, there wasn't a whole lot of people cheering that SpaceX, went trillionaire, Elon Musk became a trillionaire, there weren't people all over the streets cheering. You know, and a matter of fact, a lot of the commencement speakers in this year's graduations actually got booed, but the Knicks ignited something. And I think it was that very human experience that was part of what was so embraced by people. And also the element of comeback as well, because right now I think because they made one of the greatest comebacks ever in like sports history, and people feel that they're losing to a giant, which is also apropos for this particular sports competition where they had the Spurs had one of the tallest players, maybe the tallest player in the league. So the idea of this Goliath fighting David kind of story, the idea of making a comeback, and in a particularly human way, I think is part of what created so much excitement and why people gravitated towards it. So I haven't heard too many people talk about that, but I think it's definitely part of it. So the human aspect of these things is going to remain really important. And I'll take it one step further as well. We're gonna find that AI is very good at things that have clear answers. What's 2 + 2, right? So really kind of good. But having said that, I'm amazed how to this day, how inaccurate it remains and how convincingly inaccurate it remains. I got so frustrated with this myself that I created a tool that, you know, I vibe coded this myself. I'm no coder. Of you could put a prompt or a question into AI, and instead of just putting it in there and then having tried to research whether or not it's true, it puts it into start with, let's say, for example, ChatGPT, and then it takes the other models, Gemini, Claude, Grok, and it asks it to critique the answer it got from ChatGPT, and it puts it all into one place. And so it's called multi-verify.ai. And I did this as an experiment because it was so useful to me. I thought maybe it would be useful to some other people as well. So, and as of yesterday, I tested it in preparation for this discussion. If you had put in the question into Claude's haiku model, how many days of the week include the word day? It gets that answer wrong. It says 4 of the 7 days of the week include the word day. It's still getting something as basic as that wrong. So we still need the human. We're just, I don't know how many people are in a place where they feel they can trust what they're getting out of AI with anything that's severely important. This is very relevant to crisis. So we need it for that. And then we also need it for the idea where there are no right answers. So as it applies to crisis, you're often choosing between 2 bad outcomes, you know, and AI can maybe inform it, but you're probably going to need a human being's judgment to do that. And then for things where there is no answer, you know, it's a matter of taste, it's a matter of experience. For example, you know, I bought an expensive steak. What's the best wine to go with that? There is no right answer for that. You might want more than one answer. You want to hear it from several different opinions so that you can form your own. And in many circumstances, that will still be where humans can position themselves well. If it's going to be, you know, sort of, you know, a very clear-cut answer, proofreading a document or something like that, I don't know if that's got a great future. But things where the messy parts of life, we still have some runway there.
Yeah, there's lots of runway, and I think it was somebody from OpenAI who said the future is decisions being made out of data centers somewhere in Europe or somewhere in the US, but that's not what we want to do. We don't want to hand over our human agency to non-thinking bots, because much of life is about trusting people in roles of responsibility to make decisions for the greater good. And if there's only a handful of people, you know, at the driving the ships of AI, and of course they've now got publicly floated or boards of directors, and, you know, share price matters, then that's motivated by money. But I always feel that everyone in the world needs to upskill on AI so that they can maintain their own agency and also question the business people, but also the regulators, and ask those right questions.
Yeah.
push back. So humanity has a huge role, I think, right now.
Yeah. Well, and the regulator piece that you mentioned is really good, because what in the world makes us think these regulators are the experts either? Right? It's as new to them as it is to anybody else. Which is also one of the interesting contradictions that I've been seeing, is that, the fact that AI is becoming so ubiquitous, even though at the same time it's not in some ways, but it's becoming so much easier to use. What we're seeing now is just a huge tidal wave of AI experts, right? And so, to give you some examples, like there's one person I follow online who is a personal trainer, and would give how what to eat, how to work out, and maybe some advice to personal trainers. He now probably does as much content about how to use AI as he does about how to be a personal trainer. A designer that I follow, also a very, very good designer, is now, most of his sponsorships on YouTube are coming from the AI companies. Not to disparage what these people are doing. They're very capable, intelligent people who are creating good content. But it's a symptom of the fact that to be good at AI isn't that hard. You need to put some effort into it, and there's some things you can learn, but everybody can kind of do this pretty quickly, which is a positive note, right? Because for those who feel that they're behind, just keep in mind that everything that these people, where they were 3 months ago, is kind of outdated already. So you're not very far from catching up with them. You can catch up as well, and so those doors are open. I think that's a positive thing. But we are seeing this sort of huge crest in the AI expert world. And I also wonder what that's going to look like in the near future. So you need to be good at communications and how to function within a government bureaucracy, and know who the right people are, and all the kinds of things that you probably do. That's going to be a real differentiator in the use of AI, as opposed to using AI as an ends.
So what do you think is going to be the next, like in 12 months, what's going to be the trend of agentic AI? Was kind of where 2026 is going to be known for. What are we looking at in 2027? And I'm just exhausted thinking about it.
God, if I had the answer to that, but I'm willing to make one prediction though. We will see something go terribly wrong. We will see the first examples of someone getting $1 million credit card bill, or some formula being massively misapplied, or some bot out there doing something that can't be shut down. The first major AI gone awry, whether it be malicious or just an accident, that's got to be coming around the corner. I'm not someone who bets on Kalshi or these other Polymarket or these other things, but if I were the type of person who does that, I'd probably put some money on that idea. By the end of next year, we will see at least one major event of something having gone terribly wrong.
And it might be a catalyst then for the regulators to step in, or the public asking them to step in.
Well, and as always, that saying, this is closing the barn doors after the horses have escaped. Hopefully it's not too bad if that needs to be the catalyst. But it would be much better if we could get there beforehand. It's very hard for human beings to understand the depth of risk until something goes really wrong.
Yeah, and as you said before in our previous interview, crisis management is the ability to look around corners, and when you don't have that ability to look behind after the fact, and people are looking at why decisions were made. But where are you going to put your focus over the next 12 months, combining your own domain expertise and then trying to use these levers of AI?
Yeah, so I need to move more towards the human aspects of this. As I was saying earlier, the human aspects of crisis, and it's actually, in a lot of ways, it's a richer area because it applies to people in all sorts of functions. So every parent is a crisis manager. Hopefully trivial things such as I left my homework at home, and or something like that, but sometimes serious things. Hurricanes hit every single household in the hurricane area, and of course how organizations will be using these things. but the mechanisms by which these things get managed will be largely automated. So we still need to help the humans through this part if the computers are figuring out on their own how they're going to handle it. So I'm going to move more towards that.
And are you willing to train the models or your model in all the experience that you have?
Yeah, I think that's kind of going to be up to me to not get too precious about my own material. Look, it's probably too late anyway, right? So it's if I were to go into ChatGPT and say, tell me how to handle a hurricane that's going to hit these mid-Atlantic states with this footprint and so on. I mean, this is all back what we did at Harvard almost a year ago. It'll do that. It won't have maybe some of the specific information, but nowadays any kind of company that's worth the salt is going to have all its specific information already fed in, and it will do that. So the logistics, which used to be so much of crisis management, that this actual putting together of communications and information and the management, so on, I think that's going to be largely automated away if it's not already there. But people still need to be reassured. One of the biggest comments I used to get in my last job was in crisis management. One of the nicest things, they weren't always nice, but this was one of the nice ones, was that we're so glad you're here. We're glad that someone's looking out for us. I don't know if anyone's going to say it to AI. So we still need humans in those roles. And so that more human aspect and using AI to help you is where I'm going to switch to.
Okay, so let's leave on this question that I often finish with. Are you optimistic for our future in an AI world?
Overall, yes, with the caveat that there will be growing pains. So sort of looking at a 13-year-old, you think about a 13-year-old is very confused about what the next few years look like, and there will be a lot of literal growing pains, and a lot will go wrong, but that 13-year-old is pretty optimistic about what that person's life is going to look like in the future.
So please direct people, Jim Mulhall, where they can find your Substack and get to connect with you.
Yeah. So two things. I mean, my Substack, Resiliency Expertise, is the name, and you can go there and sign up for my my publications there. And multiverified.ai. Go in there and take a look at it and see, put in any question you can think of and see what the AIs have to say about each other. That's what's really interesting, is when they disagree. That's actually some actual value add right there. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to test it out.
Please do. Yeah.
For the next edition of my LinkedIn newsletter, because I always recommend a tool. So I'm going to try it out, stick it in there, and I'll direct people. Jim, a pleasure as always to speak to you.
Absolutely.
And continued success.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I look forward to doing this again someday soon.